Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1...
He knows how to tell me when we're on. You're right?
Yep.
Welcome councillors, staff and public. And to all those listening online, welcome to you all. Thanks for being here. Just a reminder, as we record our meetings, if you could turn your mobiles off as it can interfere with the recording, we'd appreciate that. So please be seated. Thank you. I do have two apologies from Councillor Finlay and Councillor Soward. And just to let you know that item number 19.7 has been withdrawn, which will be workshopped in the near future. Is any declaration of interest? No? Confirmation of minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of April? Move Councillor Spencer, second Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. No deputations or petitions. We go to community reports, and we're very fortunate to have Miss Andy Lucas, Executive Officer for Tasmanian Hemp Association. Thanks for being here. The Deputy and I were at an AGM or some conference, I think, opening of a conference, and heard a little bit about the organisation, and very exciting and very worthwhile. So thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me today. I am actually quite inspired to run the next meeting that I'm involved with in a much more professional manner, so this has been good from a professional development standpoint. As the Mayor's introduced me, my name is Andy Lucas. The capacity that I'm here today is in my role of Executive Officer for the Tasmanian Hemp Association, but I wear a few different caps, all within the industry of hemp. I've just returned home to Tassie. I'm a Tasmanian person originally, but have had a decade-long stint in Colorado in the States, and was lucky to be deported in 2019, thanks Mr Trump, which actually turned out to be quite a gift because I dodged the extremely unpleasant COVID bullet that's basically affecting all of my loved ones there. So as well as being the Executive Officer at the THA, I also am the founder and managing director of two small startups. One is called NSP Development, and we do socially conscious housing using environmentally sustainable materials, which I'll get to in a moment. And the other is a new business called X-Hemp, which is doing hemp fibre processing. But before I get into sort of those details, I just wanted to give a really quick history of hemp for those in the room who might be like myself of a few years ago, where I knew basically nothing at all about the plant. So the botanical name for the plant is cannabis, but we use the name hemp to describe the parts of the plant that basically have no drug value. So there's about 1,000 different varieties of the cannabis plant, and about 90% of those varieties have no drug value at all. So in the common sort of lexicon, we use the words hemp for a no drug value cannabis plant, and then marijuana for the 10% of plants that have that psychoactive compound. Now, low THC cannabis, or hemp, has been used by humans for about 10,000 years. It's basically one of the oldest crops that we've actually used. And we use it for food, the seed for food. We use the fibre in the stalk. We use it for fodder for animals, and we also extract for medicines. Hemp seed itself is a very, very healthy food, so it's very high in omegas, it's very protein rich. It's originally become quite popular as a health food or for people who are having a plant-based diet, and then for those omnivores amongst us, for those of us looking to reduce or to sort of add that extra protein source to our diets as well. But the way that I personally became interested in the hemp industry is through the fibre for building products. Had a bit of an interesting life experience in 2013. I lost my place in the Denali fires in the January of that year, and then returned home to Colorado, and in September of the same year I lost my place there in a flood. So it was a bit of a double header for 2013. Turns out it is a very unlucky number for some. Through that process I became very aware of building materials and that they're quite toxic in many ways, and from that I became introduced to a product called hempcrete, which is effectively taking the fibre of the hemp stalk, mixing it with lime and turning it into a rock-hard substance for wall materials. In Tasmania, we actually have been successfully growing hemp for several years since the laws changed in Australia in 2015-16, I think, for food. And Tasmanian farmers last year grew about 75 to 80% of all the low THC cannabis in Australia is already being produced in Tassie, so we've got an existing standalone market there. But there is still much to do. We're legislatively lagging behind places like Canada by about 2 decades. And we've got lots of opportunities here to actually be doing much better, creating good jobs for Tasmanian farmers, and then the end stage manufacturing, which is the side that I'm most interested in. With X-Hemp, what we're basically doing is taking the grain stubble from the existing seed crop. So the farmers are planting that anyway, and they're selling that seed. X-Hemp then comes in and takes the straw, which was previously being burned as waste. We process that straw and we sell it to an existing housing market. So it literally is taking a waste product. The farmers absolutely love me. I'm the most popular woman in the Cressy-Longford district at the moment. Hemp fibre is quite difficult to deal with, and we're now giving an additional revenue stream and getting a locally supplied building material. The CSIRO have asked me to participate in an international fibre trial, which we would not have been able to do if we didn't have the processing capabilities to participate in that, so that's very exciting. And we've got some corporate partnerships with people like Voss and Fairbrother, so we're really looking at scaling up. One of the exciting things from a Launceston context is we secured the next biennial hemp conference, which is actually happening in Launceston next March. That'll be about 400 attendees coming to my home city, which I'm pretty proud about. Because I wasn't busy enough, I took on the event management contract for that. And yes, I am a glutton for punishment and have absolutely no life whatsoever. Just very quickly to wrap up, the Tasmanian market at the moment's got a value of about 4 to 5 million farm gate. The global market was valued at about 6 billion last year. So to say that there's a larger slice to that pie is probably the understatement of the decade. And I really do know that Tasmania's perfectly poised to take advantage of some of that. I didn't have an egg timer. I have no idea if that was 15 minutes or 4, so I apologise. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming and all the best in your role.
Thank you.
So now we go to public question time. Are there any questions from the public? No one out there? No questions? So then we move on to no planning authority, announcements by the acting mayor, Councillor Gibson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of things I'd like to expand on further to the list that's been provided. Obviously, last week had 2 wonderful events that featured the talents of our young people, one being the Skate League event, which was incredibly well supported, and the other being the bands event, the rock music event that happened at Riverbend Park, Riverbend Rock, which was really well supported as well. Would love to recognise the work of QV Mag in partnership with the Australian War Memorial, being able to secure what is a truly outstanding exhibition that everyone should see for country, for nation, in terms of our developing relationship with our Aboriginal community and our understanding of the importance of the stories that have gone before us. This is an exhibition not to be missed. It's running until the middle of the year, and I know that the QV Mag staff and definitely the RSL members who were in attendance at the opening last week were very proud of the stories that were being told as part of that travelling exhibition. So I would encourage everyone to get along and see that. Mayor, wanted to recognise also that the relaunch of the Australian Transplant Games for next April 2022, the opportunity for our city to host that event with donors, with potential donors, with donor recipients, with their families, with members of that community is just so inspiring. And I know when you launched the inaugural event to be held last year, the story was the same, but there is such anticipation now for Launceston as we host that event next April with an expected 1,000 people being in our city for the week-long event. And finally, wanted to pass on a compliment from the Northern Tasmanian Junior Soccer Association for the outstanding relationship that they enjoy with the City of Launceston, and in particular the way that Churchill Park was prepared, is looked after, and to recognise that they are so grateful for the investment that is being undertaken there. Definitely on the day that I went there, the 1,700 young players, together with their families, were inspired, I think, to get out onto the fields, and to see those little 6 and 7-year-olds there for the first time was pretty inspiring. But to pass on CO to you and to General Manager and the team, that the Soccer Association is very appreciative of the relationship they enjoy with us.
Thank you. Any council reports? No? Well, questions from councillors? No? Council workshops. Somebody happy to move that? Councillor Harris, seconded Councillor Spencer. Can I put the motion? Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is carried. Better out of order here. So we go to 19.1. City, is that right? 18. Oh, 18, is it? Oh, wrong page. I got my stuff out of order. That's right. No idea. Where's 18.1? There we go. Draft, yep, 18.1. We're right now. Move Councillor Harris, seconded Deputy Mayor. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
Just briefly, long-awaited City of Launceston Transport Strategy 2020 to 2040 being released for public comment. It has, I guess, accumulation of a lot of work, bringing together a lot of different strategies that exist in the council and other areas to see what the vision for Launceston will look like in 20 years. And I must admit, when I noticed that there was a car accident involving a driverless car reported on the news over the weekend, I thought, I wonder what the vision will be and how close we'll be to the future in 2040 compared to where we are now. We often worry about parking and things like that, and maybe by the time 2040 rolls around, no one will bother parking their car, because who would even own a car? You'll simply have one turn up and picks you up and takes you where you want to go, hopefully without crashing. I do also notice that it has a good effort and a good, accent on the walkable nature of Launceston, but also the cycling nature of Launceston and its ability to embrace those more alternative modes of transport. Something like 91% of Launcestonians ride to work, and I hope by 2040 that's certainly nowhere near. They drive to work. I hope by 2040 that's certainly not the case, and people don't drive themselves to work, and we have other forms of getting around. So the strategy is open for everyone to have their comment on, and I do encourage anyone listening out there to perhaps get a copy online and make your comments to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy?
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, you can see on page 10 the steps that have been undertaken already to see us arrive at this particular point. Significant work, significant effort, and lots of consultation has gone into this point. Obviously, council laws have had numerous opportunities to engage, and so in us releasing this strategy, it's almost us saying that, it's been through numerous iterations of our engagement, and this is the final strategy that we're putting to the community for endorsement and support. So look forward to the public having the opportunity during the 4-week consultation period to have their say. There's always mixed views with regard to transport. There's always mixed views with regard to future visioning, but I think importantly this sets a bold vision for our city. It's not a vision for this year, it's a vision for the next 15 years and 20 years, and the opportunity for us to create the city of the future, taking into consideration all of those different modes that are presented in the strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. As the Chair of the Access Committee, I'd just like to indicate that this is perhaps more important to people with a lived experience of living with a disability or older Launcestonians than it is for many others in the community. So to ensure to all of us who are listening or here, reach out to somebody who might have that kind of experience and ensure that they feed into this final draft. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie. Thanks,
Mayor. I think the statistics sort of say a lot. Cars, 76% participants indicated that they use their car every day to get around. 72% have never been on a bus. or rarely use a bus, 42% participate or have never ridden a bike. So there's a lot of information in there, and I think that the city of tomorrow and in 10 or 15 years needs to change. Do we keep building roads to put more cars on it, or do we look at alternate modes of transport? This vision has had a lot of work. A lot of people have already contributed to the vision of the city, and I think it's a really good document for the people of Launceston to now take hold of and read and put their input on it, so that we can come back with a complete plan which has taken in everybody's views to ensure that we get the best outcome for Launceston. Because if you look at the nature of Launceston and the things that have happened post-COVID with the demand for housing and so forth in Launceston, we are on a growth spurt, and therefore we need to make sure our infrastructure is right and the way that we get around the city is going to be manageable going into the future. We already talk about clogs, and I mean, I don't think we actually have traffic jams, but we talk about points like Kings Meadows, Invermay and so forth like that, which are only going to get worse as our boundaries expand and the number of people that come to live here and call Launceston home come along. So I think that this vision is necessary. We need to now get into a situation where we can start action planning this, because the implementation of a lot of these things won't take 5 minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I do commend the council officers' work in bringing this forward to this point, and I'll probably reiterate some of the points that are being made. Launceston is a difficult city to navigate around insofar as our topography doesn't always lend itself to roads going directly to places, or for cyclists to easily, navigate a hill, things like that make it a challenge, the transport strategy for Launceston, in a steep valley with rivers to cross. And having mentioned that, of course, there may be future projects like river crossings that will also have an impact on a future strategy for Launceston. And I do really encourage the public to take this opportunity to contribute, because everyone's got ideas. Some are, perhaps more feasible than others, but nonetheless, it is a hot button topic for Launceston. As has been said, this future planning is really important, and it is a time where we need to be bold in order to encapsulate the ideas and the future trends. To try and get more of us to use public transport would be a great thing, but an even greater thing would be to get some of us using our legs, or either to walk or to ride a bike, which is a challenge on days like this in Tasmania, I agree, but nonetheless, if we can make it more convenient with some of the ideas in here, the ride and drive type ideas, the transit points and the facilities that go with that, it will make that challenge easier for a lot of us. So, yeah, definitely encouraging people to contribute now that this has been put forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 18.2, the petition. Someone happy to move? Deputy Mayor, seconded. Councillor Mackenzie. Deputy, do you wish to speak to it?
I think actually it's all contained within the statement provided there. Additional time is required. We met on site today to consider some of the additional issues that have been unpacked in the petition, and in further consultation with some written correspondence that have been received. It's definitely something that will need further work, which council officers have committed to, and we look forward to seeing some solutions on either side come back for consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Now we go on to 19.1, City of Launceston Annual Plan. Someone happy to move? Deputy Mayor, thank you. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Just briefly, Mayor, I think the thing that's very pleasing when you make your way through the charts, you see the significant amount of work that has occurred, and particularly the significant amount of work that's occurred post the thick of COVID, in addition to our incredible response package, which essentially had all parts of the organisation putting together initiatives and support mechanisms for our community. We've also been able to undertake some significant portions of work with regard to our strategic priorities as listed here in the annual plan. So it's important, I think, that those that are still to be further completed or edge a little further forward are not lost. You'll note that only one is recommended for deferral, and I think it shows the significant portion of undertakings across the organisation, and some of which we've seen great chunks of work completed, from lower numbers last time to quite high in the percentiles this time. So I recommend it for endorsement.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. So 19.2, council fees. Moved Councillor Mackenzie. Seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I think so, but I just direct people who might be interested in these fees to have a look at the page, which I think is page 67, which is where the narrative about how the fees and charges have been set. We've workshopped this on a couple of occasions, I think, but the general principles is to keep real value for the fees and making sure that we're charging appropriate fees for the work we do. We also need to make sure that we're in competitive situation with other players, that we meet the principles of competitive neutrality, and those things have been taken into place. But I think baseline 3% has fundamentally been the number that's been used to promote the fees, and they'll be up or down slightly depending on the volume or the numbers there. But fundamentally, the fees have been structured to sort of meet the needs of our community, and we need to keep in pace with the things that are costing us money in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Harris.
Just to add to Councillor Mackenzie's comment that the increase, I think it's 3.9% on average, was done on the basis of no increase at all last year because of COVID-19. And anyone out there thinking that 3.9 isn't quite the rate of inflation should in fact be looking at the fact that it's over 2 years and not just one. Other than that, I'm happy to support the motion for these charges.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just one question. The Launceston Waste Centre, in the new fees, subsidising other councils, we won't lose any money on that, and we will break even with that? Other councils using our facilities?
That's a question, is it?
Yep.
Director Everhart. Oh, General Manager.
So we are on a longer term strategy in terms of a full cost recovery pricing strategy for the Launceston Waste Centre, which we're currently in the process of reviewing and come back to a workshop soon regarding how we're performing. But the intent is that the facility runs at a full cost recovery.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
Yes, I'd just like to speak to the issue, the fees regarding waste in Launceston, and this is something that I suppose is only going to become more focused as the state does move to a statewide levy, and as a council we will have to look to move those costs onto curbside recycling because it will cost more for us to dispose of people's waste. And I just wish to publicly remind the council and the community that we need to find ways of decreasing the amount of waste that we produce, and indeed some people do that. A gentleman by the name of Oberon Carter in Hobart, who runs Zero Waste Tasmania, manages to go a whole year without filling his waste bin. Now this might only seem like a small effort, but it's something that if more and more people do, it has a cumulative effect. Yet, under our present schedule, we're all still going to be able to pay, all still going to have to pay the same amount for the disposal or the collection of our waste. So it's just an issue that I know can't be resolved today, and I do accept that we do have to, in the present moment, put fees towards waste, the cost of waste disposal. But at the same time, I really wish, as a council, we can focus on financial incentives for our community to reduce their waste. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.3, the draft proposed annual plan and estimates. Councillor Mackenzie, Seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak?
Thanks, Mayor. Again, the narrative that's there with the budget and the plan, I think outlines the strategy that we've undertaken in regards to our annual plan and budget, and affordability is important. It's also noting that we come off the back of a year where we've had a 0% increase in our rates for the last year, which weren't an increase and then a rebate back, which would mean that you're actually starting off a higher base. So we've actually lost a whole year of increase in setting our budget and plan for this current financial year. So again, I think the adoption is to try and come in at 3.7, I think, 3.75%, which I think in the context of our council's index is still well within the realms of what the cost of operating councils in and around Tasmania are. I think that we as a council are still going to be budgeting for a net deficit for the current financial year, so it's not a matter of trying to get back into surplus straight after a really significant event in our world. So what we're doing is we're budgeting, I think, in a sensible way to try and move ourselves back into a surplus situation in the next 2 to 3 years, rather than trying to grab it all back in the one count. I mean, the real issue is if you don't escalate at a reasonable rate, you end up having to play catch up at some later stage, and effectively what you're doing is you're passing on the responsibility to pay that to future generations. So we need to make sure that we design a budget that actually is fair in the context of the world that we're living in at the moment. We're coming out of COVID. There are some really good green shoots, I think, that are coming in and around our city in relation to a number of the things that are going on. And I think one of the things that we as a council were looking to do was to accelerate our capital works program to try and assist the recovery, but we found the recovery is actually happening without a significant amount of our assistance. So to me, that's a really good sign that there's a lot of economic activity which is positive, and that's not to say that there are people who are falling between the cracks and those that are still being challenged. We have hardship provisions and things like that that we can utilise in the, if we need to do those sorts of things. There's still a number of programs in our budget lines which are actually out there trying to assist a number of those people who are struggling in our community with the things that we do. But I think this is a really well-balanced budget, and it's not trying to capture all we lost back last year in one hit. It's just smoothing it out over a 3 or 4 year period, which I think is a very sensible budget process. So I commend the budget to the community. Look forward to getting their input back in regards to things. I'm sure that, as always, somebody can look at a specific budget item and say, I don't like that, and the reality of it is there'll be some things in there that I don't specifically like, but you've actually got to balance it over the whole process, and sometimes what you like and what you don't like you have to balance out, because we still need to go forward with various things. So I just commend the budget to the community and the timelines that they've got to actually respond to the budget. I commend the work that's been done by the people who have put it together, because I think they've articulated it very well and clearly in a summarised format, but I think that if you read through it, it actually makes a lot of sense, and if you really want to hone into a particular area, it's actually not that difficult. So I will say no more.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, following Councillor Mackenzie, I think it's really important to note that we've come a really long way in terms of the way that we present the draft budget to the community, inviting submissions. Certainly that was not something that happened when I first arrived here, and the opportunity for members of the public and organisations to interrogate the budget through the opportunity to provide a submission up until the 7th of May is a great process in terms of transparency and involvement of our community before we set the final we set the rate and adopt the budget in the middle of June. I want to really recognise that the $8.7 million contribution that our community was the recipient of as part of our community care and recovery package was absolutely huge. I think it made about page 30 of the local newspaper, but the positive impact that it has had, and no doubt will continue to have on our community, cannot be sold too much, because it really, I think, for some people was the turning point for them in terms of their ongoing business survival in some instances last year. So whilst, of course, on the face of it, this 3.75% rate increase will pose a burden for some people, and that's definitely understood, and that impact is definitely going to be there for some in our community, as Councillor Mackenzie has referenced, the mechanisms open to them. I think against that $8.7 million community care and recovery package, it must be, it balances out in some ways. Balances out maybe isn't the right word, but it sits against what we did, I think, in a way that shouldn't be underestimated. I want to also reference that the $25 million to be expended on capital works projects is significant, and you can read about those, the community can read about those in the agenda, and no doubt in the documentation that will be uploaded onto our pages for them to interrogate. And also want to recognise that as part of the long-term financial plan, it's intended by 2025-26 that we will return to surplus. And I really want to reiterate the words of Councillor Mackenzie in terms of the careful financial work that's gone into not only preparing this budget, not only preparing the COVID recovery package, but in terms of our long-term financial plan, which is definitely appreciated. So in supporting this, again, reiterate, there's opportunity for the community to engage up until the 7th of May. There's opportunity for the public to request assistance where needed should the rate be adopted in June. But importantly, that this budget provides for a broad spectrum of provisions for our community across a diverse area, across diverse areas of service provision to the community, and should be supported by all councillors around the table.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I fully support the rise. It's only 1.9% for last year and this year, which is great. Pity we can't do this for the future. That's what I'd like to see. One question I've got is the $750,000 for the gorge. That will be to upgrade lighting on the walkways, will it?
Thank you. Have you finished speaking?
Yep.
Then.
Thank you.
General Manager Shane Eberhard.
That's for a number of maintenance type projects, fixing up walkways, lighting. There's still some work to do on the bridge. So general maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do like the way that Councillor Spencer looks at that, a 1.9% increase over 2 years. And that is something that is palatable, I hope, to the majority of people who do pay rates. I do like to just take note of a couple of positives, I suppose, apart from, as Deputy Mayor already mentioned, the significant cost that Council incurred in responding to the COVID crisis, that we responded quickly and significantly, and that is borne out by the figures that are presented here today. But on a more, and that is a positive story, I think, and the council is to be congratulated. I'm not congratulating myself. The council officers are to be congratulated in acting so swiftly to bring those things forward. And in many ways, we were leading in the nation in those actions. But the other small, well, not so small item, the cost of money that we spend on gas, I presume this is in regards to the efforts that have been made at the Aquatic Centre in putting alternative arrangements in place for generating electricity via solar panels, and therefore a reduction in the use of natural gas up there has had a significant impact, positive impact on the budget. And, long may we continue to find opportunities like that in our community where we can have significant cost benefits, where we can contribute to environmental outcomes, and we can continue to reduce the imposts that we place upon our community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close.
Thanks, Mayor, and again, just commend the comments made by everybody else. And one thing I did neglect to say, I was just linking our budget back to our transport vision, which states that we're looking to sort of move our fleets to electric over a period of time. And I note we do have some fleet replacements, and I hope we take the opportunity where we can to utilise that, to start that program, because it'll start to move us towards that carbon neutrality that we desire. But, thank the comments, because I think we have been leading through the COVID period, and I think we're leading ourselves out in a very responsible manner in the way that we're formulating our budgets and plans for the ensuing next 3 or 4 years. I think that's really behaved on the fact that we actually have a long-term plan, and that means we can therefore manoeuvre our way around in the way we budget to ensure that over time we'll get back to where we need to get to.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we've got 19.4, the budget amendments. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I actually have lost my screen, but I think all of the items in there are well explained by the officers in their narrative, so I'm very comfortable to move that.
Councillor Harris?
Just to follow on from that, I do have it in front of me, and basically it's balancing out where we have under expenditure on some projects, moving it across to other projects who need a bit more money because often they find things that they had not expected and therefore incur additional costs. So this really is just a matter of moving the money around within the budget without actually increasing or decreasing at all. Happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Your hand up, Councillor Spencer, I think. Yeah, it's all councillors. Thank you. 19.5, budget amendments. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Again, I think they're all well explained in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.6, budget adjustments. Councillor Mackenzie moved. Councillor Harris seconded. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Similar to the last one.
Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.7 is withdrawn, as mentioned before. So therefore we have a motion now. We can have a motion to go into closed council. Moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Harris. We go into closed council. All those in favour, raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. When I get the thumbs up, we'll be online. Yeah, we welcome back an open council. Could somebody move a motion? The motion being right there that we agree with the recycling shop and recycle centre operator contract with a number of details in there. And that's moved by Councillor Mackenzie, seconded by Councillor Cox. Do you wish to speak to it? Oh, we don't speak to that one, do we? All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is carried. Thank you. We close the meeting.